Today I'm going to demonstrate how to drape the princess bodice. The princess bodice is one that has seams from the shoulder over the bust apex to the waist in the front, at the side seam, and then from the shoulder over the shoulder blade apex to the waist in the back, and then at center back. And that's what constitutes the princess seamed bodice. To begin, measure the shoulder seam at the highest neck point over the bust apex to the waist and add 5 inches and snip tear your muslin that long. For the front panel, we want the panel to go from the center front to the princess seam. So measure from the center front to the princess seam, add 3 or 4 inches and snip and tear the panel that wide. For the side princess panel, measure from the mid-shoulder point over the bust apex to the waist, add 5 inches, and then for the width, measure from the side seam to the bust apex and add about 3 inches. And that gives you the dimensions of the side front princess panel. On the back, measure for the side back panel, measure from the mid-shoulder point over the shoulder blade area to the waist, add 5 inches, and then measure for the width from that princess seam line to the side seam and add about 3 inches. The center back panel from the side of the neck to the waist, add 5 inches, and from center back to the princess seam and add about 3 inches. On the front and the back muslin, press under 1 inch on the long ends and label that center front and center back. Then, measuring halfway down the panel on the front and the back, make a mark and do a perfect cross grain line at that mark. Label that bust level line. On the 2 side panels, the side front princess panel and the side back princess panel, mark a grain line halfway down the center. So start by draping the front. Remember, we've pressed under 1 inch. That's just to firm up that center front edge while we pin and drape. We want to place the bust level line level with the bust and start pinning along this center front edge. Remember, you don't have to sink your pins in all the way. That's working too hard. We just need to hold the muslin in place. And this twill tape across from apex to apex keeps this muslin from sinking into the cleavage between the 2 bust apexes. Pinning in opposition to the way you're pulling the muslin is very helpful. You can see that if I pin this way, I could smooth and pull the muslin away from the center front, and I don't want that to happen, so I pin what I call in opposition, so that if I were to pull and smooth, it can't move. Smooth across the flat chest area of the dress form to the side front princess line and pin. You can feel the ridge of that seam through there, through the muslin. Pin that along that seam line, smoothing down. When you get to the waist, you'll notice it's starting to buckle. These drag lines that you're seeing here, these are signs that something is too tight. So just back off on your draping and let that smooth out. You're also going to need to snip from the bottom up to the waist to let that muslin spread. The waist on this mannequin is smaller than the hip, and so the muslin needs to be snipped so that it can spread to fit over the hip. When you're doing that snipping, make sure not to cut through this waist tape. At the neck, clip the curve of the neck into the muslin. I often clip almost up to the neckline, smooth this, and then finish the clipping. That way you don't over clip and cut away that which you do not want to cut away. Pin the side of the neck and then find the shoulder seam and pin along that to the princess seam here on the front. Once you have the front panel draped, with your pencil, lightly mark the neckline, the shoulder seam, and lightly mark in the princess seam. When you get to the waist, just pick a spot, either the top, the bottom, or the middle of the waist tape, and be consistent with your marking. To drape the side front princess panel, I find it useful to loosen these pins and peel that muslin back. That way you can start draping and go toward the princess seam. Start draping the side front princess panel. Measure from the side seam to the side front and find the halfway mark. Place a pin there. Place a pin there, just in the outer skin of the mannequin, making sure to sink the pointy end here under the skin so that you don't hurt yourself. Place the grain line on your muslin at that pin at the waist of the mannequin. That ensures the grain is running vertically on that piece. As you're draping this piece, make sure that the first 6 or 8 inches are truly vertical. Don't let that grain line go off grain that way. You'll notice that once we get up past the bust and into the shoulder area, the grain line takes a turn and curves around. That's all right. That's because there are curves here and curves here. Pin that in place and perform the same clipping and smoothing at the waist and along the side seam that we previously did on the front panel. Again, make sure not to over clip here at the waist. We want to go to the side front line and the side seam over here at the waist. Smoothing up the side. You can feel this ridge of the side seam. Smoothing around. I like to start cutting away. Again, you don't want to cut too much, but start cutting away and clipping to start finding where that arm's eye might be. Up here at the shoulder, smooth up. Again, you can see I'm starting to have a little drag line there. You don't want to over smooth and create drag lines, but that is where the shoulder meets the princess seam here, and here is where the shoulder seam goes. You can start clipping away some of that excess fabric. Next, we want to drape where the side front princess panel meets the side front panel. Remember, on the front panel, we lightly marked in the princess line. So again, not over draping, not over pulling, we can pin the side front panel to the front panel along that princess line, smoothing up and making sure to keep this seam on the princess line. time when this much seam allowance is getting in your way, again, you can clip away that excess, leaving yourself plenty to pin to, but it gets it out of your way. It's critical to do this pinning and make sure that this seam is exactly on the princess line. The reason that is critical is because when we drape the back, we're going to want the front princess line to go straight up, meet up with the back princess line, and continue in an unbroken line from front to back. It must meet. Once you've trimmed away and cleaned up this seam, make sure that you haven't pinned any bubbles or drags into it over the bust line. Make sure that this is nice and smooth here. As I mentioned in my previous video about draping the 4-dart sloper, I like to have this armscye be trued about an inch underneath where the armscye plate is. So I'm going to measure that down and start marking the ridge of the armscye and then blending that down in a nice curve. I'm going to mark the shoulder line at the top, I'm going to mark the side seams, and I'm going to mark the waist. You always want to do this marking in a light pencil with a light hand. You never want to mark with Sharpies. They could bleed through the muslin onto the mannequin, and that mars the mannequin. To drape the back pieces, you proceed in the same manner as you did in the front. After you've draped the muslin on the form and made all the marks, marking the shoulder, neck, armscye, side seam, waist, and the seams where they intersect, next you're going to take that drape off of the form, and the first thing to do is just check to make sure that yes indeed you have marked all the pins, because the next thing we're doing, we're taking those pins out. All right, and we're going to true the marks from the muslin to the brown paper, creating a brown paper pattern. Push pin the muslin down to the paper. And with the ponce wheel, trace through all of the markings. You want to trace through the grain lines. Trace through the bust level line. Once you've traced everything, lift up the muslin and make sure that in fact you have, and then remove the muslin from the paper. Make sure to mark the center front as well. With muslin off of the paper, now you can use the ruler to create true straight lines and 90-degree angles at center front and center front waist. You'll want to make sure the bust level line is marked. The shoulder seam is squared off. And you can start marking in the curve of the princess seam itself. You may need to use a curve for that curved princess seam. Be sure to mark in the grain line on center front and that's placed on the fold. So that's the grain line that runs parallel to the center front edge, turns the corner with an arrow that points at the center front. I like to reiterate that by saying on fold. Center front on fold. This is the side front. On the side front princess panel, we want to make sure to mark the grain line and trace around the outer edge as well. This is what the princess bodice looks like when it's trued into the brown paper. Starting at center front, which is on the fold, we have the grain line, turning the corner, pointing at center front. We have notches 2 inches above, 2 inches below the bust level line, and that corresponds to the side front seam on the side front princess panel, and the side back panel, and the center back panel.